So next, we will have a panel discussion on nutrition. So this panel is facilitated by Bastyr faculty member Mary Purdy, integrative eco-dietitian and adjunct faculty. She's a well-known speaker on nutrition and climate change, whose work includes the presentation, Saving the Planet with Your Fork.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. It's my honor and privilege to be here. I'm so humbled to be among such incredible speakers today and yesterday as well. So thank you for having me. So let's talk about food. Let's talk about nutrition. So food, it nourishes, or it's supposed to. It feeds us, it connects us to our culture, community, land, environment. And we also know that it's a really, really complex issue in terms of equity and land access and health disparities. I think many people are not aware of the fact that our food system is currently responsible for at least 1/3 of our greenhouse gases. And as Teresa was already saying, and Claudio was saying, climate change is actually having an impact on our food supply and will continue to have that impact, not just on the supply, but also on the quality of the food because of our current industrial agricultural practices. So we're in trouble. Now, I also want to acknowledge that I am a privileged white woman, and I have had food access for healthy food pretty much my entire life. I live now within a 1-mile radius of at least 5 grocery stores, 2 of which are natural health food stores, 1 of which is Whole Foods, and a farmer's market. So I know I don't have all the answers, but what I do know is that our food system needs to shift, and that it is imperative to center the voices of BIPOC communities and marginalized communities so that we are working with them and looking to them for solutions, and that they need to be at the table. So we need to include them in this conversation around sustainable food systems. And when I say that word sustainable, it is not just about the environment anymore, right? It's not just about planting a tree. It truly has to be, that's one pillar, the environmental pillar, one dimension of making sure we are within our planetary health boundaries. But we also need to look, when I say sustainability, the word needs to encompass also another pillar of human health. So creating nutritious food that is accessible to all people. The third pillar of sustainability is economic health. Are we providing fair wages, and are we making sure food is affordable? And then lastly, the last pillar is sociocultural health. So are we focusing on racial equity, animal welfare, farm worker welfare, and creating a food system that's culturally appropriate and also respectful of Indigenous practices? So where does this human health meet racial justice, meet environmental justice, meet climate justice? I would say one central place is the food system, and nutrition is at the heart of much of that. So I'm really pleased to have our 4 panelists with us today. Many of you may have already seen the fantastic presentations of Teresa Turner, who is an Army Child and Youth Services nutritionist who manages the food service operation of 6 child and youth programs, as well as Claudio Rodriguez, who is an environmental justice organizer in Tucson, Arizona, creating opportunities for green infrastructure in marginalized communities, including a school garden program. We also have with us on the panel Fernanda Brusamolin, who is a core faculty and chair of the nutrition department at Bastyr University in California. And we have Daphene Altema-Johnson, who has focused on diet-related illnesses among vulnerable and low-income populations. And she works at the Food Communities and Public Health Program at the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future. What an incredible lineup, so amazing. I feel so humbled to be amidst you all. And you all come from such different backgrounds. I want us to understand some of these issues that we've been talking about a bit better from your perspectives. So starting with you, with Fernanda and Daphne, since you haven't had a chance to speak quite yet, who is being most affected by the lack of equity, the lack of resilience, and the lack of sustainability in our food system? And what are the reasons behind that? So Daphne, let's start with you.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, Mary. First of all, I have to say, Teresa and Claudio, oh my gosh, what amazing. It's awesome to be on a panel with people who have experienced some of the issues, who have personal convictions about what's going on. So that just, you guys tickled me fancy. So thank you for that. That just was so much joy to my heart. So who are most affected? Usually, I will say that when the IPCC report came about, they know that, as you stated, that climate change exacerbates inequalities, right? And it affects socially and geographically disadvantaged people, right? And those people are low-income communities, rural communities, indigenous communities, communities of color, African-American communities. And so those are affected because, as we know, there are infrastructures in place that are intentionally, as I love when she said that, they're intentionally were in place, for those things to happen. They're a disadvantage for a reason. It's not by accident, right? And so, and how are they happening? Well, you look at low-income communities, they lack the resources to relocate, i.e. Katrina, right? They can't relocate, or when they did relocate, they couldn't come back to their home. Their food prices, when you have droughts, when you have heat, whatever it is, as we see with COVID, people are just running around the stores to get food. And what happens? You have increase in demand, food prices go up as a result of climate change. These people cannot afford food. So you have rural communities that typically have higher poverty and unemployment rates, right? They are more vulnerable. And those rural communities at times is where what are located? The farms. And, so that has a trickle down effect. You have Black communities. There was a report I read by the Congressional Black Caucus as I was preparing for this. And it just talks about how Blacks, we are less responsible for climate change, right? We emit fewer greenhouse gases than the national average, but yet the decisions that are being made are actually made to negatively impact us, right? So when you look at some of the things that are happening right now and who are affected, usually those that are empowered to make decisions are not the ones that look like the communities that they are affecting. And that present an issue. And I'll stop there because I think eventually we're going to talk, you and I talk about, well, what can we do? And I'll talk about some of the things we can do with, to bring it all up, full circle, hopefully, but we have a lot of ways to go.
Absolutely. Solutions are going to be a key part of this conversation, but starting with some of the issues and understanding them is always helpful too. So thank you, Daphne. Fernanda, how about you?
Wow, thank you guys. This has already been so inspiring. And so just a little bit from my perspective. So I was born and I grew up in Brazil, southern Brazil, where, our diet is meat with a side of something, usually a side of beans seasoned with some meat, right? So that was a perfectly fine diet growing up, 30, 40 years ago. And what happened is we see as third world countries start to industrialize, right? There is a huge shift in the way that the population accesses foods as well. So we see that, growing up in southern Brazil, meat is a big part of the diet. However, when you see how the industry evolves, it's a very different way in which people are consuming that meat right now, and a very different way in which this meat is coming from and how it's being processed. So now we know that there's great losses in indigenous forests from the Amazon, right? Because we need pasture, we need to grow grains to feed all of these animals. So just a little bit of a different a bigger perspective from where I come from. And then so that led me to look into, okay, so diets, right? There's got to be some just to do with diet from the consumer's end. So I went out and I studied plant-based diets and all of the effects that they do, and that's all great. And I made an intervention and I got some good results. And then what? right? So I think that that's what do we do? Okay, so I know that yes, we can decrease animal consumption by teaching people how to cook, tempeh and tofu and all of these wonderful things. But I am still not reaching the people that are most affected by the diet-related chronic diseases. I'm still not doing anything to help, promote those communities and their, like Claudia was saying, like, give them the power to do something for themselves. So, my point of view is, as a nutrition professional, as the nutrition profession, we need to do something in terms of, what the guidelines tell us and how do we conciliate with that. And I think we have a responsibility to educate our students and educate our community that the plug and play, the do this and be healthy approach, as Teresa brilliantly told in her presentation, right? We can't follow that anymore. We can't tell people you just eat this, and this in these balance, and we pretend that this is going to make you healthy, because there are so many other determinants that we are missing the point. So I feel like we are in a crucial point in our profession as, nutrition and dietitians. And I'm like you, Mary, I don't have the answers, but I just know that, what we're doing is not working. And I'm worried, I'm very worried that we're actually making the problem bigger by making dietary recommendations so elitist, right? And going back to the whole, I'm thinking about, like, the whole salmon conversation we heard from Darrow yesterday, from the salmon people. We make, oh yeah, now everybody's supposed to eat salmon 3 times a day because salmon is such a great source of, omega-3s. And we're making this so elitist that we are not only still not reaching the population that most desperately need help with, preventing chronic disease, but now we shifted the source of, something much deeper, something almost spiritual, to communities that depended on it for, centuries. And we are promoting an industry that now putting out products that are lower nutritional quality and contributing to environmental effects, and we're still not missing, we're still missing the target here. So
Absolutely. I think the situation is much greater than just having that garden burger in place of a burger. So I want to move on to a different question, and asking Claudia and Teresa this question too, which is our current industrial food and agricultural system as is. I'm curious from your perspective, what impact this is having on the environment, whether it's your environment specifically or the environment in general, and how that is affecting specifically human health.
Thank you, I'll go. So we looked at, I'm going back to the hierarchy of needs for a reason. It's impacting the environment because when people don't have their basic needs met, it's difficult to focus on things outside of yourself. We talk about, this is something that takes action from everybody. This is something that one person can't do, two people can't do. The world has to be on board to positively impact climate change. So if you have an entire group of people, a marginalized group, who don't know where their next meal is coming from, then they're not concerned about recycling. They're not, that's the last thing on their mind. It's not because they're horrible people who don't care, it's just because they're hungry. So that automatically impacts the environment. And then on top of that, on top of the fact that they're hungry, we think of, this might seem like a reach to some people, but you have to think of all aspects and think of when you push a domino over and it's a whole bunch of dominoes so they can spread off in all different directions. Think about waste and using material waste. When people don't have healthy food education, or people don't know how to get healthy food, they go to fast food places. That's the bags, the styrofoams, the plastic, all the things that are going in the trash and going into landfill. And if they had more opportunity for healthier options and more opportunities for sustainable options, then they wouldn't contribute as much to these issues. And it's all interrelated. It's nothing in a vacuum. And so I believe that not having basic needs met and pushing people into a corner to make unsound or unhealthy decisions further exacerbates the issues of climate and environmental issues.
I see a lot of nodding here. Claudia?
Yeah, no, I think that's beautiful. Thank you, Teresa. And I think a part of it too is access, but it's also where are these food production systems placed? Where are these production factories placed, right? When you look at the meat processing plants, majority of them are operated and ran by migrants, by people of color, but yet the communities around them are composed of people of color. So when we talk about, our impact, and, I'm Mexican right here, like carne asadas, like grilled beef every Sunday, that's like a thing. But if we're really if I'm really gonna incorporate and bring my people back into it, is having that conversation, is our consumption is impacting our brothers and sisters who live in the Midwest, who live near these plants, near these egg plants. And also a part of that is the soil runoff. Like we're composed of soil, we're made of soil. What the nutritional value of what's in the soil is what's going to be in your food, and we are depleting it by using fertilizers, by monocropping, and we need to change that practice. And I think I want to go back to that connection to land. Is if we start building up more local farms, more community gardens, connecting people to it, because when you look at history of communities, you'll always find that there was gardens in every backyard, and it was only until the industrialization that started to change. And I also think it's the practice of distribution. I think that also impacts our health the same way that y'all have mentioned. It's how our communities are designed. So we have to be able to redesign them in order to change the impacts of that health, of those determinants, that cause us to do that. So it's a long fight, but I think that's why we're here.
Definitely. And Claudia, let me ask you a question specifically. There are a number of organizations and movements that are calls to action that are working to center the voices of Indigenous people, of BIPOC communities when addressing these issues of climate change, especially as it relates to our food system, as our agricultural system, as you were just saying. What does that look like to you in your mind, that centering of Indigenous and BIPOC voices as we take steps to get to a more sustainable system?
Oh, I love this question because these are my demands. And I think it's really looking at budgets, because I work for a food bank, I work for a community food bank, and we distribute food. And it's really looking at the root causes. Like, are we really addressing the problem of hunger? Or are we being poverty pimps and just building on wealth of people who are poor? Because we're in business because people are poor. So I go up to my CEO and we talk about, what does our budget look like? If we're going to be giving out grants, we need to be giving grants out with no strings attached. We have to trust our communities that they're going to do right by spending it the way that they need to spend it, because they know they're at the front lines of this work. They're at the front lines of these issues, and we have to be able to put in trust with that. Along with that too is what is our board made out of? Does our board include youth, people of color, Black and Indigenous people who are affected by this? And like right now, like with Black Lives Matter, with Stop Asian Hate, with the stuff that's going on in Palestine, with police brutality and all these things, you have all these organizations, all these institutions putting out messages about equity and social justice. And my challenge to them is, show me your board, show me your budget, and I'll tell you where your values lie. And if you don't change them, then you're not about it. You're just about the clout, and you just want to get like on that board because it's trendy. And I think one thing too is to add to that, to center this work, we need to do DEI work, but that includes justice work to that, because all we're doing with DEI, with DEI means diversity, equity, and inclusion, is we're just showing people the vocabulary, but we're not changing praxis. You can have a whole organization that knows about DEI, but if you don't change praxis and practice and change your principles and values, you're not going to change the world. You're just going to update your model. And that's my challenge to all organizations and to all industry, is to really look at that. If you want to center that voice, pass the mic. Don't talk for us. Pass that mic.
Nice. Thank you. And Daphne, let me turn it over to you, because you are working in a public health space. You've worked in public health, you have that perspective. So how do you see community organizations and policy actually playing a role in changing this conversation?
Yeah, I think everyone has said those solutions, but I'm just going to take a step back to kind of connect it, like hopefully in a way that makes sense. But the health effects of climate change, right, worsen those issues, those social determinants of health, healthy housing, access to health care, food affordability. But what makes low-income and communities of color more vulnerable is the issues that they continue to face, right? Those issues are structural racism, inadequate infrastructure, health disparities, you know, as you said, Claudio, language barriers, less resources, right? And I can't evacuate. And it leads to all those trickle-down effects, right? Food insecurities, physical damage to communities, and emotional damage, right? Let's not forget about the mental health. This is huge. Trauma is a thing for communities of color, all communities, vulnerable communities. And these issues, right? So you look at COVID, you have obesity, diabetes, respiratory disease, and this is all diet-related issues now. And so what we know is that it starts with people's living conditions, which is what I think Claudia was hinting to, is that your living condition. I saw this quote somewhere: the color of our skin in America and our economic standing determine what food is available to certain groups. That is not okay. It is not okay. And so the question is, so what does community organizations need to do? So those issues I'm talking about, structural racism, so we need to deal with those. We need to deal with, we're talking about funding. There is a lot of money. So we as a country have a history of basically not putting, resources in these countries. So we, and in those communities, so we need to basically, when we have the money, when we have the funding, you show me your board, you show me your budget, then guess what? Put it in it and let us determine where we need. So what else you need to do? Education and training. Study shows that, developing policies that strengthen people's capacity to cope and adapt to climate change is one of the things that's very effective. So we have to engage the community that's been affected. Sometimes they don't know. So, if you have a flooding well, let's just be something more recent, Texas, the power outage, right? They didn't know where to get food. That's simple. So we need to do that. So we have to go, we have to look at these populations and teach them not only how to adapt to the changing environment, but how to thrive, right? And that is going to have to do with education. And one thing I know Isaac is going to talk about later that I'm passionate about, because I have a history in epidemiology, surveillance, data, and evaluation. People, policies, you cannot change policies sometimes. Some people are so disconnected to where the communities are going to, that you need to tell them that personal story that Claudio tells you. You need to show the pictures that Teresa tells you about. You need to hear that personal narrative. So that qualitative data needs to go with that quantitative data. So that's gonna inform your community organizations and your policymakers to prioritize action and assess if those interventions are working. I can't say that enough. And from a food perspective, subsidies for McDonald's, liquor store, again, not okay, right? How about subsidies for health food retail options? Like you said, you have to, I'm fortunate enough, privileged, where I have a Whole Foods, I have other options, but that's not the story of many that looks like me, right? So why not give subsidies to those organizations? Why not support community gardens? And we have to start at home. I am with you, Teresa. My children, they know the joy in their eyes when they grow something. If it's cucumbers, or we're doing squash right now, and they can cook it. When I tell you that make this mommy happy, you have to show them at a young age, right? So the whole idea for me is building that generational knowledge. So my hope is they can pass it on to their friends, to their, to their children, whatever that looks like. And also we have to, another thing that I'm learning, I'm doing is vulnerable populations as it relates to the jail system. When I tell you the food that is available and at those institutions, schools, like jails, hospitals, it's crap. I don't know how to put it, but it's crap. So we have to work with those institutions, right, that serve those vulnerable populations to create policies where they're buying good quality foods. That's a thing. And we have to change those procurement practices. We can do that. And so I think if we don't really we have to use the community to frame the solutions. We have to empower them because they know it's happening to them. So you can have me, but I don't live in that, right? So I wouldn't know. And I think that's very important. That's a role community organizations can play.
And I want to thank you, Daphne, for that, for just fantastic perspective. And Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future is such an amazing resource for anybody who wants more information about these topics. And Daphne's obviously a great resource as well. I want to also talk about the nutritional component here. Teresa and Fernanda are both nutrition educators, are both in the world of nutrition education and dietary guidelines and recommendations. I'm curious also from your perspective, where does the nutritional piece come in here in terms of the food that's being produced, whether it's healthy, who it's healthy for, who has access to it? What role does nutritional guidance and play in this discussion around climate change and food equity?
Sure, I can chime in, and then Teresa, please complete my thoughts. But I think that I want to start by saying that I think guidelines are important, right? We need guidelines. We need to know what to eat and what to base something on. The issue I think that we face is that the way that the guidelines are come to be in this country are questionable, right? It's a case of follow the money. It's a case of following the influence and follow the power. So when you have guidelines that are heavily lobbied by the dairy industry and the meat industry and the industrial agriculture, we end up with a very important piece of document that informs very important programs that then determine what our population is eating. So our dietary guidelines inform the school nutrition program, informs our military meal programs, informs our prison programs. So we are based on guidelines that we know we can still meet those guidelines with, like Daphne said, with crappy food. Right. And that's not okay. That should not be acceptable. Right. I can still have, dietitians like, some of us here signing off on menus and, big fast food restaurants and proving that, yes, you can be healthy. You can follow these guidelines and, do as I say, and you will be healthy. But, not telling us the whole picture. So when the biggest document that we have to inform nutrition education is based on not the health and well-being of our population and our environment, but on influences of the industries, then we have a problem. So yes, we need guidelines, but the guidelines that we have right now, unfortunately, are not what we need them to be. So I want to give my colleagues some time to chime in.
Well, first I want to say, Fernanda and I have never spoken, but somehow she hopped in my head with that statement about follow the money. I was like, how did you know where I was going? So anyway, we talk about climate, that's a C word, but we're going to talk about another C word, capitalism. When the purpose of the food system is profit and it's no longer nutrition, we're already in trouble. Mm-hmm. The purpose of food is to nourish bodies. It should never, ever have been about making a buck, but that's what it has become. And that's the main goal. And that's the root of many of these problems. It's if you can't afford A, B, and C, then you don't deserve A, B, and C. When you deserve food, no matter what you can afford. And my camera freezes. I apologize about that. So that's something that I really want people to understand and be honest about that. And when we talk about the dietary guidelines, another quote, I love quotes. You'll hear me throw out quotes. I love those. The best way to right wrongs is to shine the light of truth upon them. It's probably not an exact quote, but a lot of people don't want to dig into what capitalism really means and what it really does and the harm that it really does cause. People want to talk about free market and the wonderful things about it, but it's only a free market if you can buy into the free market. Only if you can afford to participate is it a free market. They left that part out. Like everybody can participate. No, only people with money can participate. And so then people with money get more money for participating, and people who don't have any money never get to make money because they couldn't buy in to participate in the first place. And so we talk about the guidelines. The guidelines are made by people whose heart are likely, I'm sure, in the right place. They're made by nutrition professionals like myself, dietitians like myself. We absolutely care when we put those guidelines together, but it's also with the lens of capitalism. It's always going to have that backbone of money and profit. And we have to get away from that And also into that, we talk about diet culture and fat phobia, and that all ties into as well. The purpose of the guidelines has really been geared towards obesity prevention. When obesity is determined by all sorts of things, and that's muddied, and how that all started, and BMI, and how that goes into supremacist culture and racism from back in the day, it's all built in. The purpose of guidelines should be health, not making people thinner. It shouldn't be profit. It shouldn't be making people thinner. It should be nutritional well-being for everyone. And until we admit that it's not, then we can't fix the issue.
Amen. Thank you, Teresa. We've been identifying so many problems, and I want to focus on solutions because we want to leave today feeling like, okay, this is what we can do. This is what we can see our communities doing. So I want to ask you all, what does a sustainable food system look like to you? And how can we begin to get there, even if it's just a few baby steps? Claudio, why don't we start with you? I know you got ideas.
All right, cool. What would it look like for me? To be honest with y'all, I think it has to go down to sovereignty. You know, every community should be responsible and should have the power to choose how they want to be fed, the nutritional value they want, but also helping folks to dream that opportunity. Because in my work, you know, we've only been taught to dream so far. And once we get to that dream, like our dream is like what we have is what we have and that's it. But we're not taught to dream further than that, to go beyond that. And I feel like we could already have a sustainable food system. The problem is the distribution. The problem is the practice, and that has to do with what Teresa said, you know, capitalism. You know, as long as there's a price to that, my community is always going to be poor. It's always going to be disproportionate. It's always going to be underserved. And you know, I think one of my goals for that is I've been quoting George Jackson, and I think the time is now for us as professionals, as nutritionists, as organizers, as people in institutions to take his quote to heart. Or one of the things that he said was I've been patient, but where I'm concerned, patience has its limits. Take it too far and it's cowardice. And I think we're just waiting. We're just waiting and waiting for a change to happen. But we're that change, and the youth are that change. And we have to organize, mobilize, and get people to those spaces. Because if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Fernanda, how about you?
Well, I think that we need to be champions to allow people to make to give them the ability to make informed decisions, right? So give the power to the people to make their own informed decisions. And, you know, from a very microcosm perspective, I would say, you know, grow some food, cook some food from scratch, right? Starts in your kitchen. That's like a rebellious act that we can all do. Like, you know, say, just do your own thing. Grow your little green onions from the roots and start there.
Excellent. Daphne, what does a sustainable food system look like to you, and what are some steps we might take to get there?
Man, you know, it's one that everyone, you know, we hear, you know, we know what a sustainable diet is, but an equitable food system is just, in my heart of heart, is one that's everyone, including those that are most vulnerable, right? Low income communities of color have the resources, the education, and everything that they need to nourish and prosper and benefit, right? And then if they don't have that, then from an equity, not equality, from equity's perspective, what do you have to do to have all this group be at the same level? Because some starts here, some start there, some already there. So what needs to be done? And to know that we have to be okay with some people not really having to rise up because they already are at that level. It's a system that we have access to healthy, affordable, you know, culturally appropriate food is a thing for me. When I was in my dietetic program, I just remember, you know, listening and seeing, you know, some others doing nutrition education and nutrition counseling, and they were just, it was very judgmental in the way it was doing. But it's because we live in a society that taught us that, you know, we have to look a certain way, we have to act a certain way. We are so brainwashed into that. So we actually has to get rid of all that thought and create a framework that where all of us can benefit from and nourish. So I think so. I think that, and it's not a one person, it's not a one group problem. It's not a Black problem, a white problem. It's an all of us problem, right? Because when one do well, all of us will do well, right? I mean, it's a thing. And that's what we have to do. There is no reason why little babies should be skipping meals, which is what we're seeing. Like, that's not okay. So we have to really heighten that and make it possible. And it's all of us have to be involved. All of us have to do it.
Wonderful. And Teresa, how about you? What does a sustainable food system look like in your eyes? And how can we start to get there?
Daphne took a walk in my head too, I guess. I was like, how is this happening? I love it. Truth, telling the truth. So what to me, first and foremost, what a sustainable food system looks like is no child hungry, not a single hungry child, period. Not a hungry person, but especially a hungry child, because they are the ones who deserve the protection because they didn't ask to be here. They didn't choose to be here. Somebody brought them here. And so they need to be taken care of because that's our obligation as adults who make our choices. And telling the truth and honesty is the way. When people talk about crimes against humanity, they think about things like wars and bombings and imprisonment falsely and all sorts of things like that, but they don't consider having a billionaire or a couple of billionaires or however many living on the same continent as a child who hasn't had a hot meal in a week. And they don't consider that a crime against humanity. I assure you it is. And it's allowed to happen. It seems to like it seems to be batting an eye that this is occurring. And I can't, that is inhumanity. That should not even be an existence. And that is a result of capitalism. There has to be a way. And then people say things like, well, they earned their money. There is not enough time on earth. Nobody is alive long enough to earn any amount of billions of dollars. That's not a realistic thing to say. It's not earned. It's gotten by investments. It's gotten by dealings. It's gotten by practices. It's not gotten by earning. And we have to tell the truth about that so that people who don't even have the opportunity to earn, if they want to call it earning, can get in there and get food and get a safe place to live and a safe place to shop and a safe place to exercise and all of those things. So it really looks like telling the truth about what really is and not calling it something it isn't. Not just saying, hey, it's a fair market. They pull themselves up by their bootstraps. They just worked hard and succeeded and everybody else needs to, catch up. That's not true. And people have to tell the truth. And then that way you can solve the issues. And I think that's the way forward. And for people to face the truth once they admit it and to really do what it takes and really do what is right. They make laws for everything else. They make policies for everything else. Claudio said something that really made me think of trusting people to use the money that they're given. I just sung inside because you talk about over policing and not just physical police, but over monitoring of people. The society has been responsible for the marginalization of people for centuries. And then once somebody finally gets a resource and able to make a difference for their community, you want to say, hold up, what are you doing? Send me this. I need a report. I need a paper. I don't like what you're doing. Like, listen, let me make it. Give me a shot. And instead of giving billionaire shots, you have all the policies in the world to let them continue to go on and make, but you don't have policies in place to keep children from being hungry. Something's wrong. And people need to face that and do something about it.
Okay, everybody needs to see this webinar and this panel and this power that is coming out of each one of you. Thank you for the brilliance here. And I don't know if you're seeing all of the chat comments, but people are really resonating with what you were saying. And I think all of us want to repeat and watch this again so we can continue to unpack everything that you're saying. I want to give each of you an opportunity to share with us how we can support you, how we can find you, how we can be an ally to the work that you are doing. So we just have a couple minutes left to share with us ways that we can continue to keep in touch. So starting with Claudio, if you want.
Yes. The way you can support us, is find a group of youth, train them up, let them be the ones that are going to take your place with your ideals, with your values, because we don't get that enough in our public school systems. So just do that, start those small fires in your community, support people in your area. And yeah, just appreciate y'all. Thank you for the opportunity, for allowing me to share. And if you want to follow me on social media, I'm going to put my handle in the chat. And yeah, thank you.
We do want to follow you on social media. Done. Daphne, how about you?
Gosh, that's such a good question. I'm gonna go back. It's so much. It's something as simple as knowing that what you do in your community, as little as it may be to you, is very impactful. I have my neighbor, when everything happened with COVID, she literally went out, and when I tell you, she has about an acre of land and it's nothing but food, fresh food. And she invite all of us to come, let's build, because we have to do that. And that little act she made was so important. It was so impactful, you know, because our children were able to go and help with that, right? And so I think for me, it's look at what you can do within your community, educate and empower. Food is medicine. I know that for a fact. I'm Haitian of native, so I know it's medicine. And so we have to remember that when we grow our little youngs.
I want to make sure we get everyone's voices in here because we're just out of time here. Fernanda, how can we support the work you're doing?
More of this, more conversation, more people at the table, more sharing stories, more voting with our money.
Excellent.
Yep.
Lastly, Teresa.
Yes, and I put my handle in the chat as well. And I don't do any of this for me. I do it for food insecure people. I grew up food insecure. I didn't even know it until I was old enough to know what it meant. So what you can do to help my work is to make sure you do everything in your power to see to it that you don't know an food insecure child and that they cease to exist. That's what you can do for me.
Yep.
Thank you so much to all of you. This was incredible. I want to sit down and have a meal with each one of you and share that experience. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Wow, you know, if this group of panelists ran the country, I think that the entire world would be a better place. So I'll vote for you guys any day.